All right. Well, as we get started, just really quick, I think it's very important that we acknowledge the state that our world is in right now. So I'm going to, SDF put out an official statement tweet this morning. I'm going to read that real quick just to make sure that we address the state that the world's in right now. That is that SDF stands in solidarity with our partners and the people of Ukraine as they defend their borders and sovereignty. We hope for a swift and peaceful resolution to tonight's military action. Just wanted to acknowledge that. I think it's important that we consider those things, that we understand that we don't live in a bubble. This world is all connected, and I think we feel that particularly strongly in this industry where we work online, and we have partners in the Ukraine that are affected by this, and I want to address that's going on, and that we're paying attention. Our thoughts and prayers with the folks over there. All right. Well, today we do have Fred with us from Lightmint, the NFT expert. Looking forward to a conversation with him. Just a real quick bio here on Fred. So I don't actually know a whole lot about Fred's background. It might actually be really interesting, Fred, as you introduce yourself, to kind of talk a little bit about your background. I became familiar with Fred back when I was part of the Stellar Build Challenge, and Fred was there as well with Lightmint, getting started building games. And seems like, Fred, maybe you've got a bit of an interesting background in game development, maybe even some technical banking experience. Quite interesting. I would like to hear a little bit, maybe to kick us off, just to hear some of your history and where you got to where you are, and then we could dive into to Lightmint.
Yeah, sure. I'm self-taught in everything technology. I studied French literature at university, so completely different domain. But basically, I fell in love with C++ at some point, and then I started to work in the banking sector for several years. So I worked for Crédit Lyonnais Bank in Paris, for BGC Partners, a brokerage company, Cantor Fitzgerald, in London and New York. And then after that, I wanted to chase a dream, which was to create games. So I started a career as an indie game developer. And actually, that's where I got exposed to all these middlemen kind of industries, where there's a lot of friction, a lot of problems with chasing invoices, non-exclusive licensing deals, and everything. That I believe that the NFT world is solving.
Interesting. Yes. The journey kind of from moving from, I guess, traditional finance or traditional the concept, I guess, maybe of Web 2 to Web 3 is always kind of interesting to see where that happens. So talk a little bit about Lightmint, what the journey into that was. It seems like it touches a couple different facets, both gaming and NFTs. So I'd love to hear kind of what the history there is, how long you've been building it, the different milestones that you've reached, and then just really landing on the mission and purpose for you for Lightmint.
Yeah, I mean, so Lightmint has evolved a lot since I started working on it. I think the first line of code I wrote for Lightmint was in July 2018. Yes, basically at the beginning, the goal was to leverage Stellar as a payment rail for implementing decentralized monetization models in games and solving exactly what I was talking about before, in order to be able to self-publish games and not having to rely on those centralized industries with publishers and middlemen. So using Stellar for in-app purchases, game assets, and over time, it has evolved as a full-fledged NFT marketplace that we know today. The initial game platform was released in June 2019, and my first contact with Stellar was in September when we entered SEF, the Stellar Community Fund. We didn't win at that time, but we got the opportunity to present the project in Mexico. At Meridian, and that was great to meet people. I met you, Tyler, and the ecosystem as well. And then we resubmitted the project in January 2020. At that time, we were focusing on releasing the Lightmint IO game, which is a tradable card game. It has about 100,000 players now over the past 2 years. All game assets are available on Stellar. They are not necessarily non-fungible, and we can probably talk about it later. We did esport tournaments with live broadcast on Sam's show, and also at that time we were already releasing NFT prizes as early as 2020. So, and we won SCF again in May last year, 2021, with the release of the Lightmint NFT marketplace. And yeah, it has been amazing in growth. We have 14,000 unique assets right now, 1,500 artists, and 350 of them are verified.
Wow, lots of growth in a short amount of time. Um, so that's kind of the statement I think around what Lightmint is, its history. I'd be curious, kind of as you look at business opportunities or kind of your slice of the world and where you're going to place your energies and the things that you're going to build. Where do you see the opportunity in Lightmint where you're like, okay, there's an opportunity that I see here that I'd like to capitalize on? Speaking a bit more maybe to the mission and maybe even looking at the angle of success of Lightmint has gotten a lot of usage. And so there was an assumption maybe that was made early on that has panned out at some level. Maybe you could speak a little bit to what that assumption was. Like where do you see the business opportunity, the success metric of Lightmint?
Yeah, I mean, I think the very first thing, which is what I started to define when I released the marketplace in beta in May last year, is that I think NFT is a misnomer. The non-fungibility is just a property of the assets. The supply is also a property of the asset. So it is not what matters. It is a misnomer, and I like to define it the way like non-fractionable assets, because what we really want to solve with NFTs is to power the digital good markets within decentralized environments. So we want to extend digital good economies and leveraging the benefits of the blockchain. And for this, we need non-fractionable assets. So for example, we don't want to buy 1 second of a song. We want to buy the whole song. We don't want to buy the first page of a book. We want to buy the whole book. And that's these kind of assets that NFTs are supposed to be solving or to be addressing, to be able to allow us to implement the powering of those industries within decentralized environment. And that's what we can see on Lightmint. So that's why on Lightmint, what I decided to do very early is to make sure that non-fungibility is not the criteria for accepting assets. All assets available on Stellar are tradable on Lightmint as long as they are compatible with SEP1, with the TOML file. And by being large in terms of this acceptance, we can adhere to a lot of use cases. So that's where I see really the opportunity is to not have a fixation on what Ethereum has defined as the main criteria, but having adopting the world in a much larger vision that I think Stellar is very capable of addressing.
Yeah, I think my journey in there kind of mirrors that a bit in the, you know, it's an NFT, it's a non-fungible token, and that kind of encapsulates the entry point. Like, oh, sweet, there's something that cannot be split, and that's important because you can assign value to that. But the problem is when you get fixated on that, you short circuit all the other use cases that have really not the fungibility of something or the ability for something to be split, right? So just backing up a little bit to explain fungibility, non-fungible token, NFT, the original idea being that there's this asset that can't be split any further down. And so you've got this one-of-one representation. So you can take this digital asset and associate it with some real-world asset or some other graphic, image, audio file, and this association of one-to-one asset. That's what's cool. That's what's important. And that's true, but there's a lot more that goes on of asset association with metadata. You can think of even the ERC 1155 standard, which is a single asset. There can be many of that single asset, but it's always representing a one-of-one of the same thing. So you could think of like a ticket or a membership card or something. There's nothing unique about each of the individual assets, but they all represent the same identification. And it can't be, you can't have a half of a ticket as in a sense. So that particular piece of where you bring up non-fractionable, where it can't be divided up and somebody only has half of something. It's always a whole, and it's always equal to a whole of whatever that item might be. And that is kind of cool. And maybe you could speak to some of the use cases. I mean, really, as I start to think about NFTs or this idea of association of ownership or rights or privileges, whatever it might be, of owning a whole thing. You can't divide it up. That has use cases, in my opinion, in my mind, far beyond just what we see today. And I'd be interested, kind of as you look to the future world, where do you really see NFTs filling a gap? Like, are they vanity metrics, kind of things that we play with when we have extra time and money, or do they kind of formulate a fundamental shift in the way that we think about ownership, transfer of ownership, rights and privileges that go far beyond just tokenizing JPEGs? Again, that's probably a little bit of a leading question, but I'd be curious on your perspective there.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's why the initial definition is very important, because the way NFTs are actually defined at the moment, especially on the Ethereum space, it creates a lot of logical inconsistencies. So because I think it comes from a very inexpressive design that we have on Ethereum, where we need assets to exist through a contract. So without the contract, assets don't exist anymore, and we can see all the problems that this causes. For example, if the contract is flawed, if the contract has an issue, then all the assets are affected. And we don't have this problem on Stellar, because assets are first-class citizens. They are entities on their own, and we can assign properties to them. And so when we see this from this large approach, then now we can see that there's a lot of use cases other than just hype or what the kind of reckless behavior that we see at the moment on some of those projects. We can see that there's a lot of actual use cases that are extremely useful. And I would start with the very first that I was talking about, which is the reason why we started in this space on Stellar, was to power game assets for Lightmint.io. And the way I decided to issue those assets was exactly this: to have the flexibility to not create only non-fungible assets, to not only create assets that are issued in one unit, because it would not make sense from a game design point of view. For example, we want to evolve the game design to keep it competitive at all time, and don't create those without creating those barriers in the game design. And so that was very important for me to be very flexible on that. But there's also, for example, I can talk about the first artist that has joined Lightmint. Her name is Arlena, and she was interested in selling high-resolution prints of her art. And the thing is that first, the number of cells that she could make was unbounded, so she did not want to have a fixed supply. And then also, so there was no reason for that. And the asset on the blockchain just represents some kind of a voucher that people can exchange in order to get the high resolution print that they can use. So it's basically to power a very common use case that we see in the digital good economies at the moment, and it just works the same way. Without having to necessarily have non-fungibility or a cap supply or a fixed supply.
Interesting. Yeah, again, just kind of circling back a little bit, where you've got lots of different use cases. I think that's one of the things that excites me the most about NFTs, is really this greenfield space for innovation. And you always see in spaces like this duplication or replication of things that exist in whatever the incumbent medium is, where you're kind of just doing it faster, cheaper, maybe solving some immediate problem. But then eventually there comes a time where you kind of are shifting your thinking, where it's, oh, wow, like because this is digital, because this is decentralized or cheap or whatever the improvements might be in the new software, the new technology, entirely new, in this case, market mechanics arise. And you've got opportunities to do things that literally would never be possible, right? So you're not just doing something that you did previously better, you're actually doing something brand new. You're doing something that would not be possible. People wouldn't have even thought about it. And that always takes time, right? You need time to kind of digest the new technology and see what it's capable of, and how the adoption works and what the regulation around it might look like. But then there does always come this time where people begin to build new things that just weren't possible. And I'm unbelievably excited about that opportunity here in this space, where rather than just replicating what we've seen again and again in traditional market or creator economies where you've got some piece of art or some creative item and you're trying to sell that, you can actually restructure the entire experience from beginning to end, where you control the distribution, you control the marketplace, you control the actual like relation that you have to your audience. So so much of these things are controlled at every single level, not just the payments level, not just the distribution level, not just the marketplace, but these things can kind of be capitalized at any one of those places. And I think one of the biggest ones that I'm excited about is that marketplace concept, where right now, to like be discovered as an artist, you have to get on the good side of whatever marketplace you're a part of. You have to get recognized by people that that like see the monetary value in you as a creator rather than you as an artist. They're not looking maybe necessarily to even promote your work. They want to get views. They want to get people into their application. But with a decentralized economy, you can directly tap into your audience much more directly, and the money can move directly peer-to-peer between both of you. And you don't need this large marketplace to be discovered. You just need to find mechanics to engage an immediate audience. And you kind of have these like microcosms of creator economies. And that's possible through smart contracts, through these like snippets of code or functionalities that you can replicate and move into different arenas, like all surrounding this like NFT idea of ownership and transfer of ownership, and this item that represents your love for this artist, your appreciation for their work, your that to me that's very new and very unique. And because it's not owned by some central third party, there's nobody to tell you that the fees are going up. There's nobody to tell you that we're moving over. There's no filtering that can kick you out. There's no algorithms that disallow you from being discovered. And I think that's a fundamental shift that hasn't really taken hold yet, where there aren't these monolith marketplaces, but there's more focus and direction from individual artists creating their own economies.
I mean, yeah, definitely. I come from the independent game developer industry, and I've seen businesses having to close just because they could not get accepted in time, in a timely fashion on the App Store, for example. So this technology allows us to disintermediate the whole thing, basically. And even myself, as an indie game developer for many years, at some point, my job was 70% dealing with non-exclusive licensing deals. I had over 100 portals where my game were published, 50 publishers I was dealing with regularly, so chasing invoices for getting paid, and also non-exclusive licensing deal has been part of the business. And I can see now that people can just create, go on Mint on Stellar, Mint on Ethereum as well, and then receive the money straight. They don't need to chase all this. And Stellar has also a big advantage over other platforms, I think, as long as obviously we grow properly, but there's a potential reach that spreads much beyond a single platform. So for example, Lightmint, because the ecosystem, as the ecosystem grows, your NFTs are globally available and tradable cross-currency within the entire Stellar ecosystem. So there's this potential reach that goes much beyond, and we have some kind of like free interoperability with SEP1, for example, for all the assets, and that's a big advantage that Stellar has, I think, as an ecosystem.
Interesting. As you think about or consider the future of NFTs, particularly in your case with Lightmint, what's the future that you would like to see happen? What are a couple of key innovations or outcomes that you would really like to see happen in the next few months or years?
And to me, it's like I was saying, the adoption of Stellar as a blockchain, the blockchain that people know and trust, in order to implement those use case for the digital good markets, disintermediated digital good markets. And I mean, it's not something that can happen overnight. But I can see, for example, that there's a lot of interest. Back in 2020, for example, I was talking with Zepto Labs. You probably know them. They are the maker of a multi-million franchise, Cut the Rope. And I was talking to them. They were interested in actually issuing assets on Stellar. And what stopped them from doing so was they had a talk with Google at that time, their main revenue stream, and Google advised them against doing anything with crypto at the moment. So they could not take the risk. I was in talk just a couple of weeks ago with another big game company in Korea. They have games with 10 million users on the App Store, on the Play Store, and they were considering Stellar as well because technically it just seems the right technology. It seemed the right technology to them, but they could not join because they could not find any blueprint at the moment for them to be able to join. So I can see that. I mean, the way I would love to see it is that we managed to spread awareness, to spread the word so that more of those mainstream actors are joining and implement their use case on the blockchain. And from there, then all the possibilities are open. But I think that's what needs to happen. And that's the way I would love to see the growth on Stellar.
How do you think that happens? What are the pieces that need to kind of fall into place to achieve that? Who are we kind of marketing to, or who are we trying to garner adoption from? Is it game developers? Is it minters? People, artists, creators? Do we need more templates and technology explained, education, etc.? Kind of what's the blueprint to get there, as it were?
Yeah, I mean, to me, there's two parts on that. First, there's one path that could work is to continue what we are doing and attract a lot more of those independent developers, artists, because they don't have hand tights. And that's why I think the first manifestation of NFT started in the art sector because we have people here who are independent, they don't have hand tights, they can try new things, and that's why they came and tried this technology. Now, the bigger actors, they would need this blueprint. So the first thing is just to show that it works, and then the more we are, the more power we get doing so. But another thing that I think is very important is, and I will take the analogy with what we had with JavaScript. Back in the mid 90s. JavaScript was basically a very bad language, had the connotation of being a bad language in the developers community. And they could have chosen two things to address that. They could have, because the language was extremely expressive, many people were using it in the wrong way. There was this script kiddies and things like that. But they could have over standardized the language in order to make sure that people are very limited in what they can do with it, and be very strict in the implementation. Or they could have, and that's what they chosen to do, they could have spread the good parts. And I'm referencing to, for example, Douglas Crockford, his book, which became the Bible of all the developers in JavaScript. And this way, they did not have to limit the expressivity of the JavaScript language in order to be able to spread the language, the technology, and make sure that it can adhere all the use cases. And that's what we've seen with JavaScript, which is now #1 used language in the world. But I think Stellar could have this kind of approach, which is basically to provide recommendation, a very strong effort on recommendation, on best practices, the same way Douglas Crockford did with JavaScript, in order to show the world that it can be technology that can be used for their use case to power the digital goods market of tomorrow. And maybe from that point, I mean, no one has a crystal ball for that, but from that point, we should be able to see a lot more adoption. Because what I think is that people don't realize yet what could be done with Stellar. They may have some ideas and some clues, but they don't necessarily feel that it's safe for them to try that now.
Yeah, you are speaking my language. I feel this so strongly that you don't get adoption and interest and innovation by creating this singular straight it's like to me it's like the difference between a tunnel and a path in the forest, right? They're both a road, they're both trying to get you from A to B, but a tunnel, like, you've got no choices. You go from point A to point B and there's no options. It's this concept of a really strongly typed language, or this A to B, this is all you can do. You go through the tunnel and that's it. But a path in the forest is like, if you want to go from point A to point B, here's the path. It's well worn. You know exactly where it is. But if you want to meander, if you want to go off and get in the weeds and go die in a swamp, like that's up to you. But like that's where the innovation happens. That's where people discover new and interesting ways to do stuff. And that's exactly what JavaScript allowed for. That's any technology that's too strict is either going to be like its destiny is to become enterprise software where just a couple of large corporations end up adopting it for their use cases. And there's value in that. Like we still need tunnels. But the thing that's exciting to me, particularly in a space that's so new and innovative, is like, don't build that tunnel too quick. We have no idea what this should be used for yet. We haven't landed on any standards, really. Don't be so quick to set stuff into concrete before it's time. Before there's actual advantages or actual issues. It's tricky because it's money. But again, like you mentioned, you need to have that really clear documentation and best practices and things that you can read so you know how to do things safely. You have an option to do it the right way, as it were. But there's still options to do it however you want. This is a forest. You can go out and eat the berries and, you know, who knows what'll happen. But it's like this process of discovery. And we've got to keep technology that way. I think like more blockchain languages, the EVM, I feel like is a kind of a good example here, actually, where you have this open programmability that allows you to kind of do anything. And it causes a lot of issues, and it actually ends up generating a bit of heartache for people that aren't careful. And some of that, again, revolves around it took a long time for them to become best practices. And there are like fundamental issues with the consensus around how those Solidity contracts are actually executed. But the concept of this greenfield open space to just innovate is what led to the mass adoption of Ethereum, to where like that's the standard that we compare everything against. And there's good in that. I think there's always this process of iteration and innovation that comes where you reprocess things based off of discoveries you've made and best practices you've found, and you can standardize some of those things, right? We're not dealing with individual byte code by hand. Like there is some level of abstraction and some opinions that we have even in the JavaScript language. But it's finding like that process, and where does that, like, don't be so quick to jump through use case hoops to sequester a technology to only being used for this one thing.
I mean, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I mean, because I was just thinking actually of exactly this another analogy within JavaScript, because I think that's what made JavaScript really to conquer the world, basically, and starting from a very disadvantaged position back in the mid-90s to being able to be the most used language in the world, and Stellar could definitely follow this kind of path. I remember these debates that there was with JavaScript and classes, for example. So C++, classical inheritance, you've got this kind of molds with class, and some people were thinking that in order to get adoption on JavaScript, we need to duplicate this model of classical inheritance into JavaScript and introduce the class as classical classes. And basically, they didn't choose that path, which is very fortunate. We have class in JavaScript, but class are functions which are objects, and basically they can still be augmented as we go along with the execution. They are not static like the classes, the mode we find in C++. And I think by keeping this prototypal inheritance model on JavaScript, it kept its expressivity, and the technology managed to continue to have these advantages. And by publishing a book like The Good Parts, or kind of encouraging best practices in order how to use JavaScript properly, then that was complementing the problems that JavaScript had, and from that point make JavaScript a very superior technology for adoption by the masses. So I think Stellar could follow the same path. Instead of trying to replicate what we have on Ethereum to create adoption, then we should keep on using what Stellar does well, and then improve it, but keep a complete different paradigm than the one they have on Ethereum in order to foster this adoption.
Interesting. Yeah, I agree. I'm curious though, if you think about like the ideal world where NFTs or this idea of concept of ownership, tracking of ownership NFTs exists on Stellar more primarily. How do we get there? Like we've spoken a bit about, like, we need to leave things open and not over standardize, or really not over mirror the Ethereum ecosystem, but make sure we have our own open, innovative space for growth. Are there specific items, tasks that we should be prioritizing as a community to encourage and enable this world that you envision?
Yeah, I mean, I'm referencing, for example, to that discussion we had on setting up a standard. I agree that a standard is, I mean, not a standard. Recommendations are needed in order to issue proper NFTs. And I had a concern, actually, it was back during the doc sprint, during Meridian last year. Basically, on Lightmint, we have automatic indexing. So if someone loads a wallet on Lightmint, we read all the assets and we index the assets that we don't know. And at that moment, I started to see assets that were minted as NFTs, non-fungible tokens, by some verified artists on the platform. I don't know which platform they used to do so, but those assets were just a simple asset issued on the Stellar blockchain, and the TOML was pointing to the URL of that image, but there was absolutely no link between the assets and the art in terms of the storage, persistent storage, and non-fungibility. And that, I found it extremely dangerous. That's why I started to write this blog about best practices. Now, I understand that a standard would make it very strong and allow people to do it right. Strictly, but it would also limit additional use cases. So that's why I think it's better to have recommendation and best practice on that sector rather than a standard, and rather than modifying the core standard or the core protocol, for example, in order to create those assets in a very specific way. So that's what I meant with this. Basically, if Stellar can remain as free as possible, that would be I think that would be exactly what the analogy with JavaScript would be.
To play devil's advocate, though, for a moment, doesn't that make interoperability kind of difficult if there are no concrete standards and there's just a bunch of recommendations that hopefully people will follow? What's the requirement on the side of, like, the wallets or the marketplaces, the interfaces that are trying to ensure that NFTs show up as images in wallets, or there's some, like, difference? Like, okay, how does a wallet know if something is an NFT or, any other issued asset on Stellar? If it's just a bunch of recommendations and not actual concrete standards, does that make interoperability more difficult? And is that okay, or is that not true?
I think Stellar has a very good interoperability standard, which with the SEP1, and that's what needs to be extended in order for SEP1 to be able to describe NFTs the best way possible. So, for example, as an issuer, let's just say I issue my NFT, I decide to use IPFS as the storage. That remains some kind of a black box. Wallets don't need to know that, as long as I have from the TOML file from SEP1 the ability to show the world, basically to interface the way I represent my assets in through that black box, for example. And that's so we could just use this standard, the SEP1, extend it so it can represent any media type instead of trying to standardize the way we store the data, we verify the data on chain or things like that.
So my concern there is the mutability of TOML files, right? So TOML files are very easy. They're all stored on some server that somebody hosts, and I can just change that for free. None of it exists on chain. So is some of the concern there mitigated through, in your use case, you store the IPFS hash on chain and then also reference it in the TOML file? So if those things didn't match, you could kind of make the assumption that, hey, the IPFS hash that was stored on the immutable account is different from the TOML file, so somebody's sort of in a sense tampered with the TOML file.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that falls into the same problems as verifying assets on chain. So, for example, let's say you got a USDC asset issued by a company X, then you would need to verify. I mean, they would say on the TOML file, they would provide some information, but you would still need to do due diligence, still need to check whether the asset is properly collateralized outside of this, if maybe access the audit reports before you access the asset. And that would be the same for an NFT, basically. The TOML file presents the assets to the network, tells you what it is. Now, before you acquire this asset, before you trade this asset, you would need to create those execute due diligence in order to verify whether the asset is exactly what it says what it is. And at that moment, you may have to dig into the storage, the persistent storage, the non-fungibility checks, but that would not be something that everyone would need to do in order to have basic interoperability, basically.
Interesting. I do really like the TOML file use case. I think there is still concern around the mutability of TOML files, particularly where people just they shouldn't be liable to have to check consistency. But I think there's some SDK stuff you could do, as well as, again, just those concept of best practices and a sort of assumption around punishment if this wallet's not going to list your asset if the hashes don't match between the data you say was on chain and the data that you're actually showing. So rather than
there's also also what I wanted to say is basically we had, for example, instances of fraud or fraudulent activity on Lightmint. And usually it's not because the data doesn't match, because what people do, basically, they take the art of an existing artist and they just remint it. So you have actually a match between the hash and the persistent data. That's not... that's unlikely to be the issue because it's so cheap to mint on Stellar that if someone wants to fraud, wants to steal and to sell an illegal asset, what they are going to do is just to take the art and remint it so that they have a proper asset that actually matches properly all the checks. But what it would not match is verification that they are actually the original artist and stuff. And for this, we need a lot of more process around. For example, with KYC, what we do on Lightmint, we use on FIDO in order to KYC the artist and provide some clues to the users that this artist, there's a way for us, there's a point of contact if we need to reach out if they've minted something illegally. But that's a whole process, basically, and I think it's a lot more than just on-chain verification.
That's a great point, yeah. And worth noting that it's not just the consistency of the purchased art to the viewed art, or what it was to what it is, but also that what it started as was actually legitimate. That I didn't just go on Google Images, grab a picture of something, and put it up, assuming that, hey, I'm allowed to do this, right? Just because it's on chain doesn't mean it's legitimate. That's a great point. Well, we're gonna move. I'm gonna hit some links kind of here as we get towards the end. So as folks have had questions or have questions in mind, start writing those down in live chat so Fred and I can talk through those. But would like to call out just a couple of items that are coming up. First would be we have two events coming up around NFTs. I'm going to be giving a workshop at South by Southwest in a few weeks around minting, building smart NFTs. On Stellar, so we'll be covering some of the standards that, or recommendations, I guess I should say, that Fred has laid out in Lightmint, and taking those a one step further into actual NFT experiences. So some of the stuff that we've done around the work that I've done around smart NFTs, so we'll be covering that, and then there will be an actual hackathon right after that. Hopefully, maybe Anka or somebody can get a link to those posted into live chat so that everyone who is not aware or hasn't signed up for those has the opportunity to do so. And then I would also like to call out going to Lightmint and encouraging everyone to actually mint their own NFT. If you have not done that yet, what are you doing listening to us right now? You should be minting an NFT. I went a long time. I'm going to be honest. I went a long time before I actually minted an NFT, and I was on paternity leave middle of last year. And like, you know what? I've got some time. I'm going to go on Lightmint and actually start minting in. And it, like, I can't, I mean, I'll be honest, I thought NFTs were kind of a joke until I started minting and got involved with the community there and began experiencing like what the actual excitement was. So the hype within the hype. So not the stuff you see on Twitter necessarily, but the actual conversations and people involved and just the excitement around this more deep, tangible, peer-to-peer connection you have between artists and fans. It's awesome. It's super interesting, a whole new world to get into. So I would encourage everyone, if you haven't minted an NFT yet, to absolutely do that. And then also explore. There are, Fred, you mentioned hundreds of verified artists on Lightmint now. So go and start your collection. You don't have to spend $500 just to submit a transaction. These things are cheap, as it were. The money goes right to the artist, not to the validator nodes. So that's all very cool, and I would encourage everybody to jump in. It's lightmint.com. So head on over there, mint yourself an NFT, start your collection, get involved in their Discord. It's a rad community, and if you're not super into development talk, right? Stellar kind of tends to be very developery, but this is where the creators are, the people that are more into the art and creator economies and community. It's fantastic, tons of fun. So I'd encourage everybody.
Yeah, I mean, currently there's so we have the data. There's 1.3 million XLM that have been traded specifically with those NFTs that have been issued by those artists. So there's artists here on Stellar that are actually making a living. And I also wanted to say it's not just about the art and things like that. There's a lot of different projects. There's game projects that are also coming up. And even just with Lightmint.io, it's a little anecdote I wanted to say. Just recently, I've received a message from someone from the Philippines on the Lightmint Discord. And he was telling me, he was asking me whether there's a way to ban people from their IP, from an IP. And then I said, yes, we have this ability. And he said basically because all his employees are playing Lightmint.io all day because they can make more money playing that game than by just working for his shop. And he wanted to make sure that those guys don't have access to Lightmint.io during the game, during the day. And that's just to tell you how those economies are actually real. If you remove all the hype and things like this, we can create economies, we can create markets that are actually working because what they do is just to empower the existing digital good economies that we have.
It's wild. And very cool. And I think, again, really highlights the new world we're kind of jumping into here with the new and interesting creator economies. All right, we're going to jump into a couple questions. I see at least a few here in our live chat. As people have more, make sure to drop those in. We'll walk through those as we have a few minutes here. So the first one is around the issue with Stroop issuance. So for an NFT to be non-fungible or non-fractionable, where you can't, or I guess where each individual asset is representative of a whole, right? So you can't take a thing and then split it into lots of little parts. The smallest fraction in Stellar right now is one Stroop, so 1/10,000,000th of a whole, as it were. And so that creates some issues if you're doing like this one-of-one NFT, where you want to have one and you don't want anybody to be able to split it into half and people own two pieces of the same thing or two halves of the same thing. Because of math, if you have a Stroop, you are limited. If you're going to sell that, you're limited where you can only sell it for up to 214 of a counter asset. So if you're selling this NFT for XLM, the max you could receive in return for selling it is 214 point something XLM. This is a math constraint inside of Stellar Core in how it was designed. Fred, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about this constraint, how you've gotten around it. And then Mattis has asked the question, is there any hope that we might be able to remove that limitation, set decimal limits on Stellar Core itself to where you could issue a one of something and then disallow it from being divided any further?
Yeah, so basically, yes, this limit is a bit annoying because obviously that would, for example, if you are on the XLM market, 214 XLM is the maximum price you would have for an NFT without implementing something around that. But there's a workaround on on Stellar, we can use an intermediate asset. So basically, we price the NFT against an asset that is listed against the actual market that you want to sell for. But the problem is that it creates all those cryptic orders on the SDEX, and most wallets are not able to decipher this. So basically, they show orders that don't represent exactly the market that you want, and it's not very friendly from the wallet. So obviously, being able to lift this limitation, not use an int32 for implementation on the SDEX would definitely help a lot for us. We could remove all those cryptic orders and be able to just price an asset, an NFT, directly against the market for which we want to sell for.
Yep, exactly. And as far as hope that there might be a protocol upgrade that would change this, I don't know. You would have to create a discussion either in the Google group, the engineering Google group. You could write a cap. You could actually look at core yourself and try and decipher what it would look like. From the folks that I've talked to internally, it actually is not a simple thing. Few things are. Especially when it comes to numbers, you just have to be so unbelievably careful when you start increasing the amount of storage space you have on numbers. Things can go crazy very quickly. But it would be worth exploring. There are other ways around this. You can use auth required flags on your asset, which then makes it actually pretty tricky to do DEX orders. But if your asset is auth required, you control who can hold, who can sell, how they can sell, how much they can sell. Like, you act as an intermediary between buying and selling. I think once we get smart contracts on chain, this model will probably actually become more common, where trades actually happen through smart contracts, not just for the one XLM, but to support things like royalty payments more natively. There will be a lot of fancy things you can do once we have on-chain smart contracts, which will make problems like this go away. But Fred's method for using a proxy asset in a path payment works pretty well. Again, because of the cryptic orders that you get, it's not the prettiest, but it absolutely works. So until we get something on the protocol, there's ways that you can get around it. Obviously, people are. So people have sold NFTs for more than 214 XLM. So the short answer is doubtfully there'll be a protocol change unless it's led by community, which, anybody can submit a proposal and put it in the Google group. At least we might get some clarity on why this change hasn't happened, or what roadblocks, barriers are to getting it adopted. But because there isn't this open smart contract ability on chain, these changes are not simple. But once we get on-chain smart contracts, some of this may become much simpler. So good question. That's definitely one that we get quite a bit. Fred, maybe you can speak to this one. What is the best way of promoting your minted NFT? How to get prominent placement on Lightmint's homepage? So I'd like to hear maybe a little bit about that, but then either you can speak to the concept of how you how do you promote yourself as an artist? Is that up to the artist, or is that up to you, the marketplace? This is the age-old question.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the moment, what I observe is that the most successful artists on Lightmint are the ones that are actually very active on social media, like Twitter, especially Twitter. Probably a bit of Instagram as well, but definitely, I think the best exposure is to be on Twitter and then promote your art relentlessly on there. I think this is how the artists are really able to build a lot of following and then sell their collection, and also there's another feature on Lightmint that is very important to use. It's if you can, because it's not available for assets that are issued with more than one supply, but it's to use the auction system. So basically we use the auctions are running on the SDEX, We use time-bound pre-auth transaction in order to implement the auction contract, and therefore there's no escrow. You are always in control of your asset, but you can specify a time during which people can specify their interest by bidding, and with the guarantee that you cannot execute their bids before the end of the period. That page is receiving, I think, in average between 50 and 100 auctions every day, and then it's a very good way to promote your art. Now, also on the main page, we do a lot of featuring in rotation. There's no specific rule for that. If you have a collection and we did not notice, just contact me, and we will look at it, and we will definitely add you to the rotation, because our goal is really to expose a lot more artists. But if you're active on Twitter as well, we try to retweet all the artists on Lightmint that are obviously providing non-safe for work collections. We will retweet you definitely if you contact me. So just try to be active on Twitter, contact me, and also use the auction system. At the moment, the volume through the auction system, through those time-bound and pre-auth transaction, is higher than direct sale on the SDEX. So that's definitely a good way to be successful with your assets.
That's pretty cool. And I'm going to speak to it just a little bit, because I feel very strongly like your success as an artist or a creator cannot be tied to a marketplace. Even if best case scenario, that marketplace is the key to your success, if you're not directly connected with your audience, at a moment's notice, the algorithm changes, Fred goes on vacation, your name falls off, who knows what changes. But if your success is tied to a marketplace and you don't have direct connection with your audience, that's a problem. That's going to come back to bite you at some point. And I think, again, that's a difficult thing to say, particularly in the world that we live in now, because all of these monolith platforms, they are the creator economies. You think of YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, TikTok. All of these are these centralized locations where everybody goes. But in this new decentralized world where you're disassociating earned potential from your audience, and those things are now, you can directly control both the narrative and the experience as directly tied to your audience. This requirement to use marketplaces, or that the marketplace is a gatekeeper, that goes away. That's not the case anymore. Where your success is bound to the marketplace. You need to be an artist going out and finding people. You need to put in the work to get people on a mailing list, to directly connect, make a Discord, show up. There's lots of really good resources and content out there for how to build an audience. The big difference now is that your audience can connect with you, actually fund your work in a way more direct way than you ever could before. You would have had to funnel your audience through some social media platform for you to receive compensation. But thanks to tools like Lightmint and Stellar and blockchain in general, those things are disassociated now, where you can actually get funding without being directly tied to the distribution platform. And this is a fundamental shift in how creators can earn a living off of their creativity. But it's still the work, still have to put in the work, still have to connect with people, still have to understand what your narrative is. You don't get this stuff for free. You have to show up and put in the work. And that will help you get recognized and help you get screen time on marketplaces and platforms. But at the end of the day, there's no shortcut to that. You got to put in the work. You've got to show up and be consistent. And there's lots of strategies, and they're kind of external to just marketplaces or NFT platforms. It's just pick up how to sell your art as an artist. A little bit of chill.
Exactly.
Human. There's a author called Austin Kleon. If you can find stuff that he's written, his work helped me a lot when I was initially getting started kind of in this creative space. So I would pick up stuff that he's written, show your work, steal like an artist. He's got some great material out there for how to grow and produce better work as an artist and actually get paid for it.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to take this example because that's exactly why those decentralized economies are going to. I mean, that's exactly why we work on those decentralized economies is to make sure that artists are not bound to a single platform.
Hmm.
And I wanted to say on Lightmint, for example, you can mint your assets and self-host your own TOML. You don't have to use star.lightmint.store in order to mint your assets. At the moment, we have 1,500 accounts that are using lightmint.store as the domain, but you could have your own domain, you could promote your own website and create your own followers, and yet still benefit from all the tools that Lightmint offers to you to boost your project. And I wanted to take a very quick example with what the issue is, because King.com, the maker of Candy Crush, they exactly had this problem. At some point, they had a website and they published Candy Crush. They could not meet real success there. And they made success when they started to publish on Facebook. Why? Because Facebook had access to all these in-app purchases and those users and the connected wallet, basically connected the money. And on their website, they could never implement that kind of success. Now, we are not bound anymore to this. The payments are decentralized, it's peer-to-peer. When you come to Lightmint, you still receive, when your asset is bought through Lightmint as a tool, you still receive the money straight in your wallet, and Lightmint has no say in that. We are not an intermediate in that trade, and that's why now we can implement all this and disrupt completely these problems that, for example, King.com has met with Facebook and has met with trying to publish on their own website and having to resort to Facebook.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And again, to me, that's one of the most exciting things of combining NFTs as a concept, like a creator economy concept, with blockchain like financial technology. So Stellar, for the financing tools, and like actually associating artwork with assets. But because it's this decentralized network, now any platform can tap into that. Like, you still are going to need websites. You still need an interface. It's just the interface doesn't have to be a monolith application that takes percentage cuts to display your art. And now they're the filter and they're the algorithm that measures your ability to succeed. That's not the case anymore. And we have not begun to lean into that heavily enough yet. Give it time though, and we will. That, to me, that if I were to describe Web3 from whatever my perspective is, that's the way that I see it, is this decoupling of profit, of earned potential, away from monolith social platforms where you are part of a group of millions of people who you have no interest in, and you're just hoping that you get some slice of interest from somebody. Like, why is that the way we default to? That's not the way we make friends. That's not the way we exist in society. We have a small group of people that we know pretty well, and we know where to connect with them, how to connect with them. We all kind of go to the same place, and that distance, like that my feet can walk, is what determines my friend group. With the advent of the internet, though, like, it's not the distance that your feet can go, it's just the amount of interest that you have. And when you have this ability to kind of plug and play finance into interest, you don't need millions and millions of people. You just need a few hundred. And you can succeed, you can thrive. And that's really interesting to me. And I'm very bullish on platforms arising and events and experiences kind of being built around a smaller group of people, but still financially viable, still profitable for the artist, the creator.
Yeah, definitely.
Sweet. Okay, so we kind of answered this. Hello, Oliver. Not a developer. I'm an artist with no knowledge of coding or anything like that. Can I thrive safely in this space? Are there any tips that you can give a true novice? Novice. Wow, novice. What the heck is that? Yeah. So we kind of spoke to that a little bit. I don't know, Fred, if you've got some advice pointers for Oliver here.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I think we definitely need to focus on building the tools that everyone can use and not just developers. At the moment, it can seem a bit technical in some aspects because we are also very experimental in the way we approach all this. So even Lightmint, I know, I acknowledge 100% that it's not the perfect tool for people who don't have necessarily the technical background. We are improving that, but definitely the goal is to make sure that that everyone can use it, especially without having to know anything technical about this, but still be safe in that space. But we have a lot of improvements to bring this to bring there, and it will happen over time. But in the meantime, we're still going to have all those tricky things because it's very experimental. The technologies are decentralized. Sometimes you need to know that when you upload on IPFS, your asset is not necessarily available because the gateway has some timeout or some slowness, and all those terms are coming into the way when even you would not need to be exposed to this. But at the moment, yes, we are going to work on improving the smoothness of it.
Awesome. Next question. What is your opinion on royalties and its implementation? From JF Branch.
So question for me?
Yeah. What's your opinion on royalty payments and their implementation?
I mean, ideally, what I would love to see on Stellar is native royalties, which means that we could specify a bunch of accounts and some percentage from any payments would be automatically redirected from the protocol level to the right wallets. That would make it extremely simple, and I think that's a use case that is quite common that we've seen everywhere in every single industry for dealing with digital goods. So it could make sense to have this at that level. But I'm also very excited to see a smart contract, native smart contract coming to Stellar, because definitely we will have the ability to implement royalties. Using L2's Turret is also something that I want to focus on, and I want to provide a solution for that. But I'm a bit concerned about L2's consensus. So it's always like a kind of a chicken and egg problem. It's like being the first to adopt this, the consensus is going to be weak. And then we need to be careful, obviously, to provide solutions that are future-proof. And then whether there's changes there that does not affect people that have been using this in the early days. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to create royalties on Stellar, especially this year with the smart contract. But yeah, that's definitely a use case that we need to consider, and you will see solutions for that. But I think we need to be careful to provide the right tools for that.
Yeah, royalty payments are not something in any way native to Stellar. You can accomplish it, again, through that method that I mentioned with auth required assets, and there being this centralized third party that's saying yes and no to individual requests. You can decentralize that through the Stellar Turrets network, but now that we get this advent of on-chain smart contracts coming at some point in the future, that ability will hopefully be something that can happen natively. There's still a lot of questions around what that actual implementation of smart contracts will be, what it will cost, how fast it'll be, what capabilities it will actually allow for. But I'm very hopeful that things like royalty payments will be will be a capability for achieving them through those on-chain smart contracts, where you still get decentralization, but you also get the security and consensus of the Stellar network itself, rather than some layer 2 or sidechain.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we'll. So maybe the last question here from this: what's the monetary play? Like, what's the profit play for you as a creator, as a developer, as a business owner, Fred? How does Fred make money?
Well, I mean, that's a very wild question. Basically, to me, that's a good point, because what I don't want to emulate is what we see currently in the digital good markets that are centralized, which probably all other NFT platforms out there do, which is to take a percentage on every single sales and trades that artists do. I don't want to emulate this, because I think it goes against what we are actually trying to implement. We don't want to be a middleman into everyone's trades. We want to be part of the chain. And basically what that means is for us, for example, I am currently with, and I think he's in the audience there, RCU7, 7X Mobius. We were talking about, for example, issuing some cards and some art and working in collaboration with them for the game that we are having. And then this way we can be a part of this economy, but without being a controlling middleman into this. So having those side projects, working with artists, and trying to be part of their success, part of it, is a lot more interesting than trying to be a middleman that takes a percentage on every single trade that happens on the platform. So, and also it fits with the model that we want to achieve, which is a decentralized model. So that is the number one thing. There's also additional opportunities for us, especially as we grow, and then that's where I want to explore, rather than trying to implement what we see on OpenSea or other marketplace where they're just a middleman taking a percentage on every single trade.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thanks so much, Fred, for jumping on and chatting with us. As people continue to have questions or want to reach out, feel free to jump into any one of our NFT-related general channels and ask questions there. You can also find Fred over on the Lightmint Discord. There's an NFT channel over there as well. Again, call out the workshop and the hackathon coming up. Be sure and register for both of those. And go make an NFT on Lightmint if you haven't already. Or, if you have, go make another one. And try and get that puppy sold. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Appreciate everybody jumping on.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Fred. We will see you all next time.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.